Hi Michelle, I cannot believe it's taken me this long to finally make this video about title pages. But now that I finally found some time, let's get into it. I understand that you wanted to have a breakdown of what title pages are, or how they're used, or the form fields and whatnot. I'm going to try and interpret what I think you're trying to figure out as sort of a Title Pages 101 tutorial. So to get started, I've opened up my Eclipse 8, and for purposes of this tutorial, we're just going to have a random job to make. So by pressing Alt-E, I'm asked to select or to make a job. I'm going to call it practice job. I press OK. It says it doesn't exist, so I say yes to create, and we have it completely blank. Now I'm going to act like I've received a job notice for something happening tomorrow, and I'm going to prepare, as part of my job preparation, in addition to getting names in my job dictionaries, I'm already going to make my job file and put the title page in. So at this point, you are going to start off with, you should probably start your file with a title page. That way that it's in order and it's all in place by the time you start writing in real time. So what you'll do to read in a file is you would press Alt-R, and we'll see what that looks like. And Alt-R is to read in a file. It'll automatically navigate you to the blocks folder. As you can see, block files is the name of my folder. Now, if you don't have one of these yet, you probably want to make sure that you create one. It's going to be called block files or block whatever you want to call it, and make sure that any block files you have in here, whether it's title page, the list pages that we'll talk about, lists, or parentheticals, anything that's just files and blocks of text that you use again and again and again, rather than making them from scratch every time, you just have them pre-made. So some of these, like cert pages or marked for identification. I'm going to jump down to my titles. I have many different ones depending on whom I've worked with or for what areas. But I believe I share with you my title PD, which is by Planet Depos. We'll use that as the example. So we're going to press OK, and this is what we get. Now, chances are you probably have had your agency send you one just like I sent you one. But now that you have one, we have to try and get a sense and understand of what's in here. So let's imagine you're working with this template that was provided. Let's look at the different parts of how it's composed and how they're made of. And just by understanding a title page will be so much easier for you, because then you can learn how to make one from scratch yourself. In essence, you can customize them. As I showed you in my block files, I had many different varieties because I had different needs for title pages happening in Virginia versus in Maryland, or between Planet Depos versus another agency. So to get started, let's look at all these blue boxes. They are called form fields. Now, I'm not sure if yours would look the same, but the way you can tell what text is considered a form field, in my display options, it is blue background with red text. Now, how can you see what that's going to look like for you? It's going to be inside user settings. So press Alt-U to bring up user settings, go to display, go down to color selections, and from this drop-down menu, you can see mine here, form field color. From here, you could, of course, change the foreground and the background colors to customize it however you want. I'm going to assume that yours look the same. Now we know how to identify a form field. Now, what exactly is a form field? Or why even use them at all? A form field is where you insert text. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Why don't you just do it manually? Well, because in our job, a lot of the information gets really repetitive. You're putting in the same county names or the same format up here. You're going to be putting the same types of party. PAR for me stands for the parties. You're going to be also having information that appears the same throughout the same transcript. In this instance, we might have witness names that it's going to appear on the first page, or later it'll appear again down here, the name of the deponent, or the name of the deponent again. So form fields are really convenient because sometimes you can set it so that they auto-populate some information. So form fields are really useful for auto-populating information throughout the same transcript, like I just said. They can also auto-fill swaths of text by picking up that information from another pre-existing file, like a list file, which we'll talk about later. And that's really useful for such things like months of the year. That's the same thing again and again. The days of the week, you can always select from the same list. Firm addresses. These are things that we can get into in probably the next video, because this is just purely the very early bones of what are form fields and how to work with title pages. So we'll get into all those later, but these are just introductory information. Another great thing that auto or I'm sorry, that form fields can do is they can do some auto formatting, such as automatically capitalizing text inside of a file, or text inside of a certain little form field. So we'll see these things in actions in a bit. But let's look at what a form field consists of. So the way you can figure out what's inside of this, like kind of the programming behind it, is you can put your cursor anywhere inside these boxes and then press Control A, and that will open it up. So then we get this Add Blank dialog window. So let's take a look piece by piece and see what's in here. I'll give you a breakdown of at least my understanding of what each feature does. The field label is honestly how you are going to label your form field. It has no impact actually on what is going to be inside of the form field. It's simply the way that I can remember or have a note to myself to identify, oh, right, when I'm inside, when it says PLF, what does that mean? Well, for me, that's a reminder that this is supposed to have the plaintiff name in here. So you could put anything. You could write plaintiff. It makes no difference. Whatever you want to put in there, it's perfectly fine. Let's see. This is, again, useful for labeling your fields in case you forgot what information you want to put in there. So you could put date, witness name. I like to be detailed so I'm not confused. If you have nothing in here, it'll actually appear blank. And maybe contextually you could figure out what information to put in there, but just to make sure you don't forget, just give it a label. Now the field size, I've actually honestly never even changed this number, because what do I do instead is I press adjustable. I believe that the field size actually would dictate how many characters you can fit inside your form field, but I don't really understand. I can't think of any instances you'd want to have a limit when you could really be benefiting from having it to be adjustable instead. So instead of worrying about the field size numbers, honestly, just press adjustable. That means that the field size can accommodate whatever number or however much text you put into it without moving things around too much, I believe is essentially what it is. I highly recommend you pretty much always have adjustable selected. Next we have variable. This is a really great one. This is how you can get the same information to auto-populate throughout a transcript. Now let's look at this example. Again, I have looked inside of the plaintiff because, as you can see here, this is the caption, the case caption, which is going to show what court is taking place in, and then the name of the plaintiff. You would probably put plaintiff here. Let's assume it's a straightforward one. The name of the defense, and then if it's defendant, third-party defendant, whatever. So why do I have P name in here? This too is just kind of a random code or like a shorthand that I had learned from someone else. It doesn't really matter what text you put in here, so long as you're consistent with it. So just for my sake of remembering, P name means the name of the plaintiff's name. So you can really put anything you want in here. The key is that when the next time you are going to make a corresponding box, use the exact same information. So like I said, this is P name. Now let's close it. Again, I was looking in here. Okay, the plaintiff's name appears here. Where else will it appear in my series of title pages? Okay, well the next time is right here again. Let's see if I open this up. We should be able to look inside by pressing Control A, and yes, it says P name again, and it's the name of the plaintiff or defendant. I also, doesn't really matter what I call that. And that means that any information I fill here, by the time I get down to here, it'll just automatically put it in there. So you don't have to worry about retyping it all over again. It's really great. That's what helps the form field keep track of the information so long as this variable is consistent. It can help the program think, oh, okay, you already had something filled with the label P name before. I'll just use whatever you had from last time. Wow, really useful. Now let's go back up again. So again, I'm just sort of playing around inside here. Next we have the prompt for contents. And I honestly don't even recall what or how this is used. I have never used it, so let's just skip it. Delete line if empty. This is pretty self-explanatory. It does exactly what it says it'll do. This happens when you have a series of, let's say, 5 form fields in a row for like an address, which we saw later right down here. For instance, these are all connected to each other. It would be the name of the firm, the first line of the address, the second, etc., etc. Now, if one of these has delete line if empty, is in the case where usually most addresses take up all 4 lines, but if there's sometimes where it's a really short address and it doesn't need that last line, it'll fill in all the information, the firm, and then the first address line, and the second one, there's no more information for the third one, and it will just erase it automatically. So that's pretty useful. We'll eventually be looking at examples where we are putting in addresses and how to kind of build those together, so we'll get into that later, but just for now you can see what that one does. Next we have capitalized content. Now I really love this feature for anything that you just want to have the text capitalized in any situation, so that when you're inputting the text you don't have to worry about pressing the caps lock button or making sure your capitalization is consistent. Just it'll automatically all capitalize the contents. This is useful in instances where, I guess if your firm says, oh, you know, we want all this to be niche-capped, or the witness's name, not niche-capped, I'm sorry, all caps locked, then you can have that automatically. And you don't have to worry about, capitalizing while you're typing. Pretty useful. Let's see, next is last field. Now you'll see this again in action later, but what it essentially means is that, well actually first to understand it, you have to know that when you are filling out form fields, Eclipse will automatically jump your cursor to the next form field after you're done with the first one. And so by selecting this box, what it essentially does, it'll stop your cursor from jumping on and on and on. Now, why would we even have this? Well, this is pretty useful when it's been selected in instances where a form field is being used in the middle of an ongoing transcript. Like when you have an exhibits marked parenthetical, right? You're typing along, writing. Someone says, please mark this exhibit. You use your I do moid to bring up a parenthetical that has a form field in there that I'll fill in later. So that while I'm doing my scoping, if I'm going along and I get to that little parenthetical, I put in the information, and when I'm done putting the information, it doesn't jump me 30 pages down to the next instance. It just stops there, and then I can continue editing. I don't have any of those selected for these early lines right here, because when I'm doing the title page, I'll pretty much have my title page open on one side of my screen, then I will actually have the case caption PDF or whatever I receive from the agency on the other half of my screen, and I'm just going back and forth and making sure the information is consistent, so I can just plow right through this without needing to stop. And again, because last field is not selected, it'll just jump my cursor to the next box over and over and over again. Let's see, what else is inside the box? Right flush contents. Again, I have literally never used this. I'm assuming it just makes things right aligned, I suppose. Okay, use list file. This is a huge one. This is one of the niftiest features of the form fields, as I mentioned before, because this is where it draws information from a separate file entirely. It's called a list file because that other file you've made, it essentially just contains a list of information that you can then choose from. This one here, for example, okay, party. It uses a list file of L, which stands for list for me, hyphen parties. Again, this is just the name of the file, which means you can name it whatever you want. Inside of this file, if we took a look at it, which I guess we can do really quickly, I'm going to open up a file, go into block files, down to L parties. Look what's in here. Nothing much. It's just a list. Line 1, line 2, everything's separate, with different ways that a party is, as a plaintiff versus plaintiffs, versus defendants versus employer, carrier. And so going back to my previous file, when I am in here, when I'm filling out the information, it pulls this list up, this like in a nice little form. Actually, you can see it really quickly. If I want to fill it, oops. Oh, we'll do it later, I guess. It will then allow me to select pretty conveniently from that list. So when I have all my ducks in a row, we can actually see that in action. Now, the last feature in here is we have mathematical formula. Now, I've only heard legend about this feature. It apparently can do some pretty amazing things. Like it can automatically calculate the number of page numbers in your document, put in the date automatically, etc., etc. Now, I've never done it, so I can't speak on it. Okay, so we're just at the end of our 15-minute video. That's everything I wanted to talk about this add blank, which is the programming inside of your form fields. Now that we have a sense of what it's composed of. Next, we'll talk about actually filling them in and seeing how they interact with other form fields inside the same document. So I hope that this was a pretty useful little introductory video, and we will pick up again in a little bit with more information. Thanks again.